Good morning and welcome to our webinar today, A Strategic Approach to Digital Accessibility. I'm Linda Coburn, I'm the moderator today. I'm a middle-aged white woman with pulled back hair, round glasses, and I'm wearing an orange sweatshirt. And I'm going to do the introductions, the welcome, explain how the webinar will run this morning, and then I'll lead our panelists through the questions for the rest of the session. So we're delighted to see such an interesting and mixed audience with us today. And it'd be really good to hear from you all who you are and what your roles are and why you're interested in all of this. And for that reason, we'll use the chat function, the written chat function, because we're in webinar mode, so your cameras and microphones are turned off, but the written chat is where you can ask questions and tell us, make your comments and suggestions and give advice to each other and so on. Okay, so there's a few practical questions before we really get into the session. The things that are available are, we have a live captioner with us, Jen, and if you would like to use captions, there's a link at the bottom of the Zoom screen. We're also recording this webinar, so it will become available on our website after the event if anybody wants to go back and look at it again. If you have any other questions or need any practical assistance, please make a note into the chat and our team will be able to help you with all of that. And also we have instructions on how to use the multi-pin function if you find that useful, a new function in Zoom. So those are some of the practical ways that we will use Zoom to make this webinar as easy to follow as possible. And now I wanted to introduce you to the space as an organisation, in case any of you aren't aware of the space and what we do. And as you can see, we're the UK's digital commissioning and development agency for the arts and cultural sector, and supportive of the arts section, Arts Council funded, and we work with organisations and artists in lots of different ways. We commission work, digital works, provide a mentoring scheme, and other aspects of sector support and skills development, of which this webinar is one of a series. That's really who we are. So our webinar series really builds on the work that we do with organisations, and it's really about sharing some of the practical learnings that we have developed through the rest of our programme. Okay, and so now I'll give you an outline of what's going to happen during the course of this session. So as you can see, this is the beginning bit, the introductions, and then we'll hear from our three panelists. They'll introduce themselves and talk a bit about what they would really like to happen, how they think that digital accessibility can be much more strategic and built into everything that the sector does. We'll hear from Harmeet Chagger-Khan, who's our digital producer, on the value proposition for digital accessibility. And then our panelists will talk about why digital accessibility rather than accessibility more generally, why that focus, what's important about it. Then we're going to have a short break, 10 minutes, to allow you to recharge. And we've also created some resources which we will speak more about, and that will be a chance to have a look at those. And then we'll talk more about how do we make the cultural shifts necessary here, and then widen that into a whole panel discussion for the last 10-15 minutes or so, and we'll close by 12:30. So that is the plan for the session. If there's anything else you need to know, please add a comment or a question into chat at any point, and I'll put questions that are relevant to the speakers. I'll put those questions to the speakers. So while somebody's talking, you think of something you'd like to ask, add it in there and we'll pick it up in the Q&A section. So there's lots of time for questions as we're going along. Okay, so that's our setup, and I'm going to invite our first speaker to join me now. So that's Zoe Partington. So I'll wait for Zoe to turn her camera on and appear. Here she is. Hello, Zoe. Would you like to introduce and describe yourself? And then I'll kick into my big question.
Yes, no, of course. So, morning, everybody. I'm Zoe Partington. I'm sitting in my dining room because it's freezing in my studio. I work as an artist in disability arts and inclusive practice. I've done that probably for about 35 years. It's something very passionate about. And I work across, I suppose, all art forms and all institutions, advising, celebrating, helping, and trying to make sure that disabled artists are at the centre of everything. I'm sort of in my mid-50s, blonde hair, blue eyes, pale complexion, and just really happy to be here today.
Thank you, Zoe. So in this webinar, we're talking about as we're describing, the radical potential of digital accessibility. What radical change do you most want to see in arts and culture, and maybe in the wider world?
I think for me, and I hope in a way it's obvious to everyone, I want us to invest in disabled creative thinkers across, all platforms, but I know particularly thinking around digital art and digital accessibility and digital content, I think it's really important that we're having conversations with disabled artists and disabled creative practitioners all the time, and we're not. So for me, that's where we need to be concentrating and investing, really, because things will flourish and it will change if we do that. And I particularly think, if we can't get it right in art and culture, who else is going to? So I think it's really important because we're so flexible and we're so energized to do that as a sector. Yeah.
And you're saying you want conversations all the time. What would that be like?
Well, yes, and it can range. It's not. I mean, obviously not every single day, but I think when you're deciding to do something, you might want to engage, disabled producers, disabled journalists, disabled writers, dramatologists. It's not just about, a disabled person sitting on the stage and performing. And like we've had in the past, sometimes the disabled people have just been plonked there, really. It's about that disabled person being at every level within those institutions and organisations and culturally offering their unique insights and ways of working so that we begin to collaborate and work more cohesively, I think, together. Because I think, I know, there's that missing link all the time when a disabled person isn't present or that slightly different way of doing something isn't there. And if it is there, it's valuable to everyone. It's not just about the disabled person, it's about all of us having a better experience, really.
Yeah. And I suppose that's part of what you do as a consultant, isn't it? Is you're sort of finding yourself in all kinds of different situations across all kinds of different projects and offering a different perspective to the one that the people you're working with already have.
Yes, yeah. And I think, just to give you a really, last week I live in the middle of Shropshire, but I managed to go to Bewdley Festival and I went to see the, on-screen show of the Vermeer exhibition. And it's stunning, it's absolutely incredible. But I just watched that film thinking, isn't it a shame, all those people producing this at an incredibly high level, they've not really put any audio description into it or any sign language that I could spot whilst I was in that room. And I managed to get a seat really close to the front. I managed to have a PA with me that could help me. But if it's not happening at that sort of level with these big institutions producing art content, how do you expect people with less budget and less infrastructure to do that? And actually, surprisingly enough, people with less infrastructure and less budget do that. So I sort of question why the bigger institutions aren't doing it, really.
Which leads us to questions of leadership, doesn't it? And that's a whole other, we might come to that a little bit later on, but who is leading and what would happen if that change was made?
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to invite Natasha to join us now. Thank you. Natasha, would you like to put your camera on? Hello.
Hello.
Hiya. And Natasha, so you're our second speaker. So would you like to introduce yourself and describe yourself, and then we'll pick up that same question, the change that you would like to see.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. It's really good to be here and join you all. I'm Natasha. As you know, I am an equalities designer. What that means is I work across sectors. I'm a designer by trade. Um, a description of myself: I'm British Caribbean. I have short dark brown hair in a ponytail. I'm wearing a navy top.
Thank you. Before I go on to asking you the question about the change that you'd like to see, I noticed that you told me that you kind of coined the phrase equalities designer for yourself. And why did you need to do that?
Because I found that there were gaps in awareness and perceptual gaps, and sometimes erasure as well. So essentially what I attempt to do is stitch together the gaps or create new spaces.
Yeah. And erasure is it's a very powerful word. Yeah.
Yeah, what I found is, and this happened most recently, I was invited to contribute. I won't name the organization, and I gave my pronouns and they were produced incorrectly, and then they weren't changed. And then I was also given the wrong a description of what I do. And again, lots of emails back and forth. So sometimes I found that just being present is not always enough. You still then have to advocate, because it's about the value systems as well and understanding that people have.
Yeah.
I think from an intersectional aspect, because I belong to several what would be classed as non-dominant groups, it can be even trickier. Like, for example, when I mentioned about the pronouns and what I do. So I believe what they needed in the space was a particular type of person. So because I am from a non-dominant group, they could change that because they had the power to do so on a superficial level. So again, it's about the values and ethics as well, I think.
Yeah. Values and ethics, again, which is another question we'll get to in more detail. Thank you for that. So the question I asked Zoe, the same question to you. What radical change would you most like to see? So is there one thing, Natasha, that would one change that you would like to see in the sector?
Let me see what I wrote some things to begin with, because sometimes I get selective mutism, so it helps me along. So what would I do in the sector? I mentioned the shift in values and priorities. I've also put down positive and emergent obsolescence, and by that I mean making what I do in its current form obsolete, so that I can move on to the other challenges in the world as the world continues to change. So I guess something that's responsive to the challenges. That would be really nice to see.
Yeah. So are you saying that you would like to be in a position where you don't have to think about the challenges to you specifically in order to think about bigger questions?
I think a transdisciplinary emergent approach is good. It provides a type of fluidity and responsiveness to challenges as they arise. I think sometimes what I found is, and it can't be helped, when people are within a discipline, they want to a certain extent, maintain the purity of the discipline, if that makes any sense. But then sometimes that can stymie the solutions that are created and limit solving it. Because once it's solved, then what you do is no longer required. So I think something to do with, fluidity. I tend to change things a lot, but it'd be good to see more transdisciplinary type of work to make, reframing risk as something that's like quite exciting and emergent.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Natasha. That's a great start. And I'm going to invite Tony now to introduce himself. Oh, there's claps for you, Natasha. Tony, hello.
I'm joining the claps for Natasha. Thank you very much, Natasha. That was great. And sorry to hear about your not great experience. That doesn't sound, it sounds rubbish. Sorry that happened. Hey, Linda, sorry.
Hello. So same to you, really. Introduce yourself and describe yourself, and then we'll think about the changes that you would like to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey everybody, lovely to meet you all. My name's Tony. My pronouns are he, him. I am of South Asian heritage. I'm a brown man in my late 30s. I'm wearing a black t-shirt today, and I've got short black hair. I'm sitting in front of a blue wall with various plants and trinkets and whatnot behind me. I'm part of a team. I'm a producer at an organisation called Watershed, which is a Bristol-based arts organisation. We have a cultural cinema space, but we also host a research space in partnership with the University of West England and the University of Bristol, funded by the Arts Council. And in that space, we provide research and design space for people working in and around creative technologies. And my role in that space is as the inclusion producer, which is a gloriously vague job title, but it gives me a load of space and scope to support my colleagues in the development of their opportunities and engagement and funding opportunities in and around creative tech, and also looking at some of the processes within Watershed as well.
It sounds a really interesting job. And so when you've said that you could kind of go in lots of different directions. And the question I want to ask you is about this, what's the one change that you're really gunning for? What would you like to see?
Ooh, so it's a really great question. So often in my work, I spend a lot of time suggesting change to people and kind of going, oh, you could try this, or you should do some of that, or how about we did this? And often the question can come back to what we can't afford or what we don't have time for, or kind of I call them deficits in inclusion. And the question that you're asking was around kind of what radical change could look like or anything. And I find it really interesting when people talk about radicalism, because it changes. What is radical changes from time to time. Co-creation was once really radical, and now co-design might feel more radical than co-creation. And even like the phrase diversity was radical once upon a time, and now we talk about inclusion all the time, and that soon will feel outdated because there'll be something that's pushing that envelope a little bit further. And kind of the radical action that small arts organisations can take is different to the ones that large arts organisations can or should take, as per Natasha's experiences there. And that's different again to what community arts centres are capable of. The change I'd like to see is that people should move away from seeing inclusion work or the kind of change to access needs and things like that as being in a deficit. It shouldn't be about something that we are having to do extra. I think there's real joy to be found in it. That's the change. Find the joy in connecting with as wide an audience as possible. If you can change the way you do things, you build a whole new relationship with a whole new community. And I find that to be such an exciting way to look at inclusion work, rather than it being a strain on budgets and timelines.
You're talking about joy, and Natasha was talking about risk being something exciting. So there's lots of ways of reframing, isn't there? And that really feel important to this.
Absolutely, yeah.
Go on.
If you can centre the experience of people with needs that are different to yours, and it's flipping difficult, it is resource intensive, but doing it anyway is what makes it radical practice, I think. Yeah,
doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And finding a creative outlet in there. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you, Tony. I'm going to bring Harmeet in. This first section is really my chance to kind of introduce everybody, all of our panelists, and for you to get a feeling of what they're about. So Harmeet, would you like to introduce yourself and describe yourself?
Yeah, hello everyone, nice to meet you all, and thank you, Linda. I'm Harmeet Chagger-Khan. I'm a British Indian female with dark wavy hair and faded pink highlights. I'm wearing a green top, and I'm in a room with a green wall next to me and various Star Wars Lego paraphernalia. I'm executive producer for innovation at the space, so I look after the space's suite of immersive, interactive and digitally innovative projects.
Thank you, Harmeet. And all of our panelists today and you have been involved in a series of action learning sets that the space have run around digital accessibility. And I wondered if you could introduce that and sort of say, why is the space interested in this area? What were the action learning sets and what have they led to?
Yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned in the initial intro, the space is a digital development agency, and we support cultural organisations and artists across the sector to look at what digital might mean for their core practice and how they engage with audiences. And so we do that through our core commissioning programme, as you mentioned, our broadcast development programme, our webinars and our mentoring strand, and also our partnership work. And through our commissioning program in particular, we commission small and mid-scale organizations to create new digital content and to support them to build capacity and develop their digital skills using digital technology and platforms. And what we noticed, especially through our commissioning program, was that the approach to digital accessibility was a little bit inconsistent. And so as funders, we wanted to ask ourselves the questions and find the answers to how we can address sector challenges around digital accessibility. So really exploring how we can support organizations to confidently create, commission, produce, and program new digital work that improves access to arts and culture, that engages new audiences who don't necessarily experience their existing work, that creates opportunities for disabled artists to be platformed and have their work gain visibility in mainstream settings, and that ultimately removes the barriers that stops audiences with multiple access needs engaging with arts and culture. So along with Zoe Partington, we convened an access working group that consisted of producers, artists, curators with disabilities, as well as organizations and funders. And over the last 9 months, they helped us to interrogate deeply and mine insights around raising digital accessibility standards and protocols for publishing digital content, really by identifying best practice, scoping how organizations can embed this as long-term automatic behavior by building capacity from within, looking at the future of storytelling and exploring how disabled artists who create digital content are shifting the landscape by creating work that is innovative and becomes new forms of engagement. And then looking at the business case and the value proposition so that this becomes a long-term strategy that organizations invest in, which results in a cultural shift in the sector. And those sessions and insights have resulted in the 2 articles that we're launching today, which is the thought leadership piece and the best practice guide.
Lovely. So we're not going to dig into the documentation, the resources too much today, because that will take up time, but we're going to put the links into the chat so that people can look at the resources, look at and listen to, because they come in various different forms as well. So you can explore all of those. And Angela's putting the links into chat and we'll explain what's available. Okay, so one of the outputs was the creation of these resources and sort of sources of how to work and where to go. And the first point in we call it the thought leadership piece, like why are we doing this? Why does it matter? Is that, you know, the sort of initial statement is really saying, you know, change shouldn't be the responsibility of the people who are disadvantaged by the status quo, the current state of things, but should be the responsibility of arts organisations and funders and the sector more widely, which is what we've just been hearing from Tony and Zoe and Natasha. So what can you say about the drivers for funders, that includes the space to get involved? And, you know, you're talking about the business case and the value proposition. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, when we use the term digital accessibility, we're referring to the extent to which everybody, regardless of their physical or neurological experience of the world, can engage with online arts and culture content with the same ease. And as funders, we are not only in a position of responsibility, but we are also able to support organisations and artists from the get-go when they come to us, and therefore influence how the sector addresses these challenges and reframe why that cultural shift is necessary and important. So one of the key insights from the sessions was around the need for the cultural shift by asking the question, why aren't we including disabled people? And I think really when we ask that question, we shift our focus to the non-disabled mindset of the culture that we're operating in. And you see this in the social model of disability, which shows that disabled people are not disabled by their impairment or neurological difference, but by the barriers that they encounter in society. So it's about addressing and reframing what societal norms are already in place and dismantling those barriers. And I guess really, truly to, you know, in order to dismantle those barriers to arts and culture and create digitally accessible content and programs, you have to embed accessibility from the start. You have to, as Zoe mentioned earlier, employ disabled producers and artists and curators and leaders and consultants. when you are commissioning and creating new work or programming that work as an organization. And you have to collaborate with the right tech providers and specialists to make that work accessible for disabled audiences. And one of the ways that the space did this was in 2021 with its Culture in Quarantine 2 program, where we commissioned 12 disabled artists to create new film and audio work for the BBC. So the space's core values of championing creative innovation to provide high quality experiences by being collaborative and inclusive go hand in hand. But of course, as funders, we are always constantly learning, and therefore iterating on what we do is really, really important. And as the Access Working Group pointed out, it's always about progress, not perfection. And then to pick up on the second point that you were asking about the value proposition and the business case, well, the business case is really interesting, you know, because it's not just about the bottom line, which actually definitely shows a positive economic impact. So being digitally inclusive results in a tenfold return on investment, which is incredible. But more importantly, it's about recognizing that 1/8 of the world's population, that's over 1 billion people, see themselves as having a disability. So the potential reach of inclusive digital work is huge. And then if you wanted to kind of consider thinking about the value proposition, the why, that's really important in making that cultural shift. So by commissioning and employing more disabled artists and producers to create brilliant new forms of cultural content, not only are we pushing the future of storytelling into the present, we are also raising the bar for creating a cultural landscape that tells the stories of those who have different lived experiences than you might have. And this in return enriches the fabric of culture. Who gets to access it? Who gets to tell those stories? Who gets to experience those stories? And even in those points of difference, those stories contain universal truths that allow us all to connect to one another. So these experiences and stories have to be told. They have to be visible and be accessible because they enable us as a society to be more inclusive, innovative, and equitable.
Yeah. It is, it's sort of going back to, I think, Zoe's point about who else is going to do it. You know, it's important, isn't it? The stories do need telling. Thank you, Harmeet. So I'm going to just check whether there's any questions from the audience for anybody so far. And then I'm also, we've had a brava Harmeet from the audience. I'm going to ask Zoe to come back in as well, because we're going to look at the question of, you know, why are we talking about digital accessibility? And Zoe, to you first, and then we'll bring the others in as well. Could we make a distinction between what we're calling digital accessibility and any other kind of accessibility?
Yes, I mean, I think we have to, because as we all know, accessibility is incredibly wide. And, you know, it ranges, doesn't it, obviously from, you know, buildings to digital accessibility, to language, to information. You know, it's vast, but manageable. And I think one of the things is that, and it was probably 12 months ago, I came to Fiona at the space to talk about the fact that digital content was really not accessible to all disabled people, and that non-disabled people were making decisions without considering, not considering disabled people, because in a sense, because they weren't necessarily having some of the experiences or noticing what's missing, because they don't need to, whereas disabled people notice immediately what's missing. We weren't getting the same package during COVID as other people were getting. And that to me was something that needed changing, and very rapidly, because we're in that motion now of using digital in much more significant ways. And I just thought it's really important that we start to focus on digital accessibility. I've been to a lot of people to try and get these changes to happen. And I'm still getting, I suppose, people resisting wanting to change. You know, fortunately, the space was incredibly open to making that journey and to beginning to understand how we need to get everybody on board across the entire culture sector, really.
What do you think's behind the resistance? I mean, I'm not really asking you what's in other people's minds, but do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, sometimes, you know, you can well, going back to this term of radical, sometimes you can feel it's because you're being discriminated against and people don't want you in the space. But I think actually it's because people aren't thinking about it, they're not aware of it, they haven't reflected, they don't necessarily evaluate, or if they do evaluate, they're still not asking disabled people about the quality of that experience of that digital content and that digital engagement. And you know, you see it across all sorts of scenarios, because you know, disabled people, if they can't access it, how are they going to comment on it? And how do you know they haven't? You know, people are just going to not go there or not experience it. So you've got this dichotomy going on. You've got to find disabled people. You've got to have those conversations, because if you don't, you'll continue to just carry on in your day-to-day life, not knowing any difference, really.
Yeah. And so, and the discussion we're having here, which is about kind of involving people, asking questions and so on, that you could apply that to accessibility more generally, or inclusion more generally, couldn't you?
Across absolutely anything, Linda. And this is the issue, isn't it, that I think one of the things to do, and obviously the space has rightly done that, is this, you know, talk to disabled facilitators that are out there. They have huge, vast networks, and within seconds, they could give you a list of 22 people that could come and do the things that you're not sure about or have no knowledge of, because we're there engaging with other disabled people all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And is there anything specific about accessibility in the digital space that we could be making more of, or that we should guard against from your point of view? And I'm going to invite the others to join us back in if they've got thoughts on this as well.
I mean, I think one of the things is that you know, it's the design of the products and the software. So if disabled people aren't at the centre, even in that particular area, you're still going to be making products and software that doesn't include disabled people. You know, and I've used things like, you know, digital gallery spaces to show artworks in, and those digital galleries, they're set up to be a package, an off-the-shelf package, which, you know, you can use, and they're fantastic because that does give all artists access to things, you know, they can't always afford or be in those big white gallery spaces. But you can create your own digital gallery, you know, online, and the world can see it. You have global access. But it's still quite difficult to embed audio description and sign language videos into those gallery environments. And I sometimes think that's why maybe the big players haven't got it when they put these things out as well.
Mm-hmm. So there's a comment, somebody's commented to the hosts and panelists, which again is going to be, she's saying, just to let you know, if audio description is switched on in Zoom, any messages in chat get read out loud, as well as the discussion taking place. Very annoying. And I suppose that's the thing, that that's an example of us isn't a person who doesn't use that software, not being aware of what's going on and the impact of it. So
yeah, I think, and it's really true. And I think organizations need to, you know, you don't always want to hear that somebody hasn't had a good experience, but if you do hear that someone hasn't a good experience, you then need to act on it and try and change it.
Yeah. I'm going to bring Natasha in because she's put her hand up, Zoe. Natasha, what did you want to add?
Yeah, just to build on what's already been said and what someone put in the chat. I think in regards to the offerings, like we are using Zoom, so it goes beyond sort of our knowledge and like the very beginning of the thing being created that we're using. And I think parity of esteem comes into play, and that needs to be acknowledged as well, because I think that there should be an offering where everybody can select what they need in regards to access, and if they need the chat switched off, there should be an option for them to do that. So that was just my thoughts on that. Parity of esteem is so important, like being aware of.
Are you saying parity of esteem?
Yeah, because there's like a hierarchy of communication modes, And also it doesn't come into people's awareness. Like, for example, if somebody has a device that reads out everything in the chat, has that been factored into the design for the Zoom chat and captions? It's just things like that. But I think that speaks to them and organizations and ourselves just campaigning and advocating for agile teams, because, you know, I'm often asked by organizations, you know, what would you like? And I was like, well, an agile team would be good, so there's someone like me already here.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I'll turn my camera off now.
Oh, okay, lovely, thank you. Tony, is there anything that you wanted to add into this conversation?
Hey there. So one of the notes that I had against this was the need to have, don't feel the need to have all of the answers all at once. And I think this is a really great example of it, actually, of an organization that's doing great work and thinking about this really deeply. But we've got problems with the audio description here, and it's because the tools to hand aren't fit for purpose. I'm sure that they did not involve themselves in co-design processes when they built stuff like this. Is my very broad assumption on it. But I think in feeling that people need to have all the answers, it can, organizations, especially ones with less resources, can end up feeling like really overwhelmed by it. It goes back to that point around finding joy in building inclusion practice and trying to understand what accessibility means. Of, you know, you start where you can and do what's possible within your means, and then you can build on it later. And if you can approach inclusion with honesty and transparency with the people that you're building towards, that there is grace in that. Sorry, hello. Were you going to say something?
Yeah, no, I just to mirror that point. I mean, I think, you know, disabled people are very aware of the budgets that organisations have, and the honesty and transparency. You know, with a smaller organisation, I've got no issue if that organisation is doing everything that they feel possible. And sometimes what I find is that the smaller organisations are more creative than the people with the huge budgets, and actually make the experience a positive one. And I think it's that fundamentally organizations need to grasp, that it's about, it's to do with process, isn't it? And it's the interaction. It's not just about having the most amount of money to put some access feature in place. It's the engagement process, and it's the being honest. So I think that's brilliant.
Can I ask you, I don't know who, Zoe, probably this question might be to you because you referred to facilitators. Thank you, Tony. Somebody's asking, in terms of finding disabled people to consult, are consultants and facilitators best to contact individually, or should we go through a network?
I think if you're new to this, I think do all of it. Find the right person for your organisation for you to work with. Sometimes, and you know, large, trying to think how to put it, you have to be very, very aware of the social model of disability and all the applications and interactions of that. But you also have to be aware that disabled people are controlled and managed by other people all the time. So some organisations that say they're representing disabled people are representing themselves, really, not necessarily disabled people that may have more insights. So I think if you're looking for consultants or people to guide you, just start chatting and getting, you know, lists of people and start finding things out. Find out what they've done before. So I can't give you a sort of straightforward answer, but I think it's about trying to locate these people through other networks and begin those conversations. And you can start with something really small. You don't have to sort of, you know, very quickly launch into a giant project, but I think just begin to have the conversations.
There's thumbs up from Tony. And Natasha, did you want to add something?
Yeah, and to build on that, I think it's important to, if you can, for your continual professional development, have training in safeguarding and trauma-informed approaches. It's also good to be aware of Boon theory and crypt time, just so that you understand when you are, you know, creating briefs and such and meeting times and things like that, that you are aware of if somebody has, for example, a dynamic disability, you know, they may not always have the same energy levels every day. And in regards to timeframes as well, yeah, especially if somebody has like a PA and support, that will be based on a particular time frame as well. And also to be aware of, like what Zoe said in regards to people saying they're doing things for disabled people, neurodivergent people, underserved people, but actually they're doing it for themselves. So get familiar with relational and transactional methods and approaches, so you know which one you're implementing and when and why. I think, yeah.
Thank you. So you mentioned a theory. You don't need to come back on, but well, earlier you talked about a theory and I didn't catch the name of it, and I wonder if you would you do a summary of what you've just said in chat? Could you do that for us in the break, but perhaps just some notes, because you're using quite specific terminology and I think it would be really helpful to people.
Yeah,
So
essentially
it's important, just the terms, and we can.
Yeah, essentially relational is about building the relationships, for example, with the individuals you're working with the communities, and not extractive. Transactional can be quite extractive. It can lead to like co-creation, co-production, co-engagement, burnout, stuff like that. It's not always the case, but in order to avoid the other sort of polarized, less productive, desirable end of transactional engagement, yeah, it's good to be familiar with it. But yeah, I can notes.
That would be really helpful. Thank you. Thank you all. We're going to take a 10-minute screen break now, and if anybody is interested in taking a look or a listen to the resources that we've launched today, and that Angela has already put it into the chat for those of you who can access them that way, we're also as ever really interested in any feedback that you might have on those resources. So if you have any comments, you could email us. That would be very, very helpful. We would really appreciate that at events@thespace.org. And also on the written pages on the resources, there's a box at the very bottom with an opportunity to give feedback. So if you feel like giving us some feedback, that would be super, super helpful. So we will turn our screens off now. It's 11:43, so we'll reconvene at 11:53. And again, if any more questions coming up, put them into chat and we'll get to those after the break. Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Just before we go back into the questions, there's a couple of questions. Well, to the questions to the panelists, there's a couple of questions in chat which I will flag, and then perhaps we will. Anybody might have an answer to these questions, so I think they're quite general. The one is it was at 11:39 in the chat. Gary asked, what's your feelings about the artistic vision argument? i.e., if you add BSL, captions, ramps, disabled actors, the integrity of my work is jeopardized. Zoe, do you have a thought on that?
Yes, yeah. I think, sorry, just something on my screen. Oh, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, something. It's a Windows thing. Artistic integrity and embedding, inclusion and equality practice into that. This argument's been going on for probably 100 years. And one of the issues, I know with architects, when you look at, buildings and spaces, and it's the same in digital content and the art world, everyone's always looking at that, accessibility is going to ruin the design or the content or the artistic practice. because very often it's been formulated by non-disabled people, the interventions to put inclusive practice into it. I think what we've still got to recognise is that probably disabled artists aren't at the heart of that work and development. And that's when it will change. That's when artistic integrity will flourish and, be absolutely incredible. And I think we need to notice, we're doing these things not to, not to enable a disabled person to fit in. We're doing it because artistically it's going to be at a much higher level than other work that's on the scene. And, for example, I've worked with architects that have put, for commissioning projects and things, they've sent an audio description in of that building and that visual space that they want to create to a panel of commissioners. And they've been commissioned because that made it come to life, that made it more informed. So I think we've just got to start thinking differently and begin to understand. This is why I think you need to know a lot of information. You need to read things. You need to know about disability heritage and disability culture. You need to understand the implications of the social model of disability. I know that's a lot to take in today, but I think, begin to start reading the documents, begin to start understanding what has happened to disabled people, and that actually we haven't been at the centre of this decision making. We haven't been at the centre of the designs. Most disabled people do not want a platform lift in a space. They're awful. They're the most unattractive, awful things that have ever been designed. But you can bet a bottom dollar non-disabled people probably design those particular things. So I think it goes back to conversations, doesn't it, and investing in disabled artists and creative practitioners. And sometimes if you talk to those people, they'll do it a much more cost-effective manner than somebody else that's trying to put in a access or inclusive solution. So I think we really have got to open up these discussions and dialogues.
Thank you. I'm going to bring Tony in. I think he would like to add to that. Thanks, Zoe.
Yeah, thank you, Zoe. Just echoing what Zoe said, really, I think it's an opportunity in there. Again, going to make it the theme of my talk today to talk about finding joy in the work, actually, of finding a way to be creative about what it means to be accessible as part of artworks is a really amazing creative challenge. Like, I think there's something really joyful about doing that. I wanted to share one of our residents in the studio, Charlie Williams, his name is, has been exploring what it means to have creative captioning on live performance. He did a lunchtime talk for us recently, and I've just posted a link to it in the chat. It's about an hour long. It should be captioned, I think, so people can catch it in there. But it's a really great example of somebody who's taken that on as a design challenge and is running with it and building some really amazing bits of tech off the back of it.
Fantastic. Thank you. While you're here, can we sort of carry on? So we're sort of starting to think about, how do we change things? And a lot of what we've talked about is people asking questions and being open and finding out more. So he's talking about, you need to know loads more. Yeah. And I'm wondering what good questions do you use, Tony, in your work? What are the questions that you ask of yourself and of the people you work with?
Absolutely. I guess, and I missed this out of my introduction a little bit earlier, having spent a lot of time working with people building projects, I spend a lot of my time asking questions and trying to understand where change can come from in our processes. And actually that flipped into a bit of a kind of an inclusion strategy tool. It's called the Inclusion Framework for Change. I can share links to that as well. But that is essentially at its heart a series of questions. But I think the first questions in it are always, they're really simple ones. What are you trying to do and who are you trying to do it for? It comes back to that kind of, how do you center the experience of the person that you're building towards or building for in this kind of a space? And then as a follow-on from that, once you can really have specificity around the people that you're building towards, to think about what they need from you, actually, and to do that way, actually, what do people need from the resources that you've got available? And then my favorite design questions of all time are, well, who is this for? And do they want it? Do they want it from you? And have you asked them? Are always my first design questions. And I'm like, well, actually, there's that question of, are you the person for this piece of work? And if not, how are you connecting with the people that are resources, especially in the arts, are really scarce? And how are we making sure that we are distributing them all equitably? I also talk a lot about kind of, so earlier I talked about deficits, and if people see deficit in kind of building access and building inclusion and things like that. The other side of that, which is the bit that I hope that we work in, is what I call asset-based inclusion, actually. So what does it look like to do what you can with the resources that you have? My challenge to people is always that if you can't do X, can you do Y, actually? Like, so if you, this is the kind of ideal, this is what you're aiming for, the all bells and whistles version of what you're trying to build. But then actually, what is the manageable version of it? What is the thing that you can do now in the spirit of the work that you're trying to achieve? And how do you plan and build for what you're trying to do later? That's not an invite to just be like, oh, it's all right, we're doing the best that we can, actually. And that links back to the use of that word radical, and kind of how do you keep pushing yourself to do the most that you can in a space. And yeah, those are probably my very early design questions. Centering people that you're trying to do something for, with their needs kind of at the heart of it, and then work out what resources you've got to meet the needs of those people.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to invite Natasha to join us and see what kinds of questions she asks, see how they fit together.
Okay, good to be back.
Hello.
Hi. So questions. Well, I find it interesting to find out how organizations see themselves. So normally when you ask that, they'll provide you with like their mission statement. And then sometimes it's useful to see most times it's useful to see their access statement as well. And then compare and contrast along with that, the experiences that people have with them, external of the organization. And then through triangulation, you can kind of, well, I use it to gauge how in touch the organization is with like the emerging needs of the people that it's intending to engage with or focus in on. Sometimes, yeah, I've mentioned reference man before. Sometimes reference man creeps in a lot. I think it's helpful in helping me gauge how much input, steering, friendly critique is needed to be a critical friend. I think in regards to, because we're talking about this, and I did mention before, like I think it's to do with the values as well, in regards to like getting people to implement long-term change. And for me, I think that digital inclusion and accessibility is a human right. So I think it should sit alongside more explicitly along the alongside the 12 pillars of independent living.
Yeah,
I've also got some thoughts in regards to like the approaches, like maybe if organizations pooled their resources, that might be positive, like through partnerships. And I found that not just in the like more sort of physical sense, but also in like the intangible sense in regards to devices and what organizations offer. There's lots of closed communities where, you know, this traditional sense of having a competitive edge is still like got like a real stronghold within the different industries. So it'd be really great to see a shift towards radical collaboration, because in that way, for people like myself, you know, that need various adjustments to access things, it's better, there's a better flow, and also less costly. Like, because if you have something, for example, like a screen reader, and it might not work on every device, because this whole thing about having a competitive edge, like the things don't speak to each other. So when I mention like a joined up approach, I mean in that sense as well. I think in every sense there needs to be a joined up approach and a reframing of this whole competitive edge that organizations have, because it locks people out like myself, and it can be quite costly as well because of the digital divide.
Are you talking costly to the individual or
Yeah, it can be costly to the individual. I know that organizations are very mindful of that, and sometimes they say that's the reasons why they haven't done particular things, but because they, you know, hold on to this having a competitive edge and having closed communities where partnerships could flourish and access could be better for people like myself, so people that engage with the content, maybe even people that create the content, it's it's not possible yet. I know plenty of people that have had to buy lots of different things to access different offerings online because the device or whatever, it just does not speak to the other thing. And I think sustainability is an issue as well. But again, a joined up approach. So if somebody creates something online and I can't engage with it because my laptop is outmoded, I'm still locked out. So I think, yeah, everyone needs to speak to each other. I did mention before about like positive emergent obsolescence. So yes, there's a need for having things that are no longer required, but also you need things that are emergent, like my device, my laptop. It shouldn't be outmoded. I should be able to engage with everything online in the next 5 years, maybe just with an update. I shouldn't have to go and buy a whole new laptop. Sorry, I'm going on a tangent, but
it's interesting what you're saying is it's a kind of plea to a bigger world, isn't it? This is beyond arts and culture. This is saying the whole way we approach things need to change. And I guess that, and our question is like, and what can we do within that? And I guess you keep talking and keep discussing it. So, Zoe, did you want to add something?
Well, probably a way to help people make sense of what we're trying to say is that disabled people, a lot of disabled people had disability living allowance, which enabled them to have a little bit of extra funding to deal with accessibility and barriers that we were having to negotiate in life and the rest of our lives. And then that was converted to PIP, so personal independence payment. But what's fascinating about all of that, and that's why I want people to really understand this, is that we have to apply for funding as disabled people, which is quite complicated and quite difficult. We're then assessed to say whether we're allowed to have funding, and we're having the funding so that we can break down the barriers or find creative solutions to access things like everybody else. So the whole thing is just completely wrong, really. So at every single level as a disabled person, you're assessed to see whether you're allowed to access something. So I think that's the sort of thing that we're working with. So I think the thing I want to say is that, the smallest thing can have the smallest change within an institution or within an organization or in an individual artist practice can have a profound, massive effect and impact on disabled people trying to access it. So I think, sometimes you might think you can't do everything. And I think Tony's mentioned that, don't think you have to, you have to do, manageable bite-sized chunks. You have to do what you can. You have to be realistic, but don't bury your head in the sand and don't think that these things don't need to be changed, because they do. And over the last 25 years, things have changed dramatically. They really have. And the disabled people's movement had to fight so much, 30 years ago. And a lot of those disabled artists and practitioners now, opened up those opportunities for young disabled artists, to be able to be out there, to be on Strictly Ballroom and to do all those things. But it's taken a lot of hard work and a lot of time. So I think it's really important, really, to notice the gaps, and notice your own gaps in knowledge, really, about what does access really mean.
Thank you. Tony, did you want to add something in?
Yeah, just off the back of what Natasha was saying around it's a really great example around how you center someone's needs, and then think about what resources you have available to meet those needs. It's really, like, in an ideal world, everybody would have all of the tech that they needed to engage with the thing that they have. And then, but actually, in the moment of, wouldn't it be lovely if we could send everybody a computer and they could come and engage with this thing, but maybe you don't have the resources for that. So actually you bring it back one and think about what other resources do you have available? Maybe we don't have computers in the office, but we've got a network of organizations. Could we source them from somewhere else? Could we learn some from somebody for a week? So I talk a lot about resource, but then also kind of what capacity we have to create change and what power we have to create change as well. And those kind of being the levers of change, or the change engine, as I like to call it.
Can I ask you about, so you have a role within an organisation, which is a sort of unusual on our panel,
Yes.
specifically working for one organisation. What kind of how much scope do you have within Watershed to influence how the organisation works?
So currently I'm in the middle of a really exciting piece of work of so we spent the last couple of years building this framework and establishing this set of facilitation questions to help people to build strategy, and kind of trying to understand.
Zoe, can you turn your microphone off,
Oh,
please?
sorry, Linda.
That's all right. That's all right. Thank you. Sorry, Tony, please carry on.
That's okay. So yeah, spent the last couple of years building this framework within, I was working within a project within Watershed, and this framework came out of it. And it does encourage people to do that, to kind of consider what their capacity for change is, what power they have to make change, what resources they need to make the change they're trying to make. And it comes with a bunch of different workshopping resources. Very excitingly, in the process of working through that framework with Watershed as an arts organisation at the moment. And there's a really gloriously joined up approach to it. So I'm working in my so I'm the inclusion producer, and so I work thinking about inclusion, working very closely with the head of people at Watershed, Helen Jaffa her name is, to explore what our strategy is and how our policies inform that strategy, or the other way around as well. I think there's blurred lines between those two things, but we're also working really closely with our head of data, so Layla Barron is her name, and making sure that we're making data-driven decision data-driven inclusion strategy and decision-making in that kind of a space as well. We're actually in the process of trying to publicly share some of that. So we share a lot of our balance and belonging data capture process online at the minute, but within, I don't know, give me till Christmas, and there'll be something positive to share online about how our process is working and what we're working towards there.
So you're able to take what you know and sort of turn it in on your own organisation and think. It's just supposed about using your resources effectively, isn't it? And making the most of what you've got.
Well, it's just, I find I often end up in spaces where, yeah, people, it's if you're in a meeting and you suggest a change, very quickly the conversation goes, oh, well, we can't afford a BSL interpreter. And I'm like, all right, that's okay this one time. But if you keep saying that every single time, then is that again, are you just committing to never engaging with the deaf audience in your work? And I find that really, I feel like that's a cop-out. I'm like, all right, so we can't do that one thing. What else can we do? What can you do instead to engage with an audience whose needs you can't meet in that one specific way? And this is the challenge that I'm now putting to Watershed of who are we trying to engage here? What resources do we have available to meet the needs and enrich people's lives in that sort of a way? And what's within our capacity? I think that's the thing that often gets missed out of these conversations, is actually, you know, so this is another example that I use quite often. If you are in the middle of, if you've got 5 events coming up and an end of project report, and you're trying to get that other bit of funding in, and you're getting married, maybe now is not the time to start unpicking your whole governance model. Actually, maybe like that takes time and it takes effort and care and love. And if you don't have the space for that now, then don't do a bodge job of it. Like, actually take your time with it. And similarly, like if you might have all of the resources in the world and you might have all of the capacity in the world to create change, but you're bound to some outputs and some KPIs that you signed up to a really long time ago. How do you work around those? And kind of how do you, what power do you have to create change in and around those kinds of spaces as well? These are challenges that I'm putting to Watershed in a minute. Thank
you very much. Natasha, did you want to carry on?
I think I have some thoughts on what's been shared so far in regards to change making. As you know, I work across different sectors. One of the things I do is I've been appointed to be for local government, a co-production strategic implementation panel member, and it's quite new what we're trying to do, and we're trying to put in place governance. Now, as I mentioned before, you know, the whole thing about transactional versus relational, or when it is and isn't appropriate. But I think what's important is the way we've done it is that there is local government councillor as a chair, and then there is a disabled person as a chair, and they share those roles. So I think what I'm trying to say is the structure is important, And then that way every voice is included and so the intersectional aspects are covered. In regards to, because somebody wrote in the chat about an engagement in regards to design co-creation, and it was quite extractive. So in regards to the governance, we're trying to deal with that and bear in mind paying people for their time, but also how does that impact people's benefits? May not be one size fits all. So that's an emergent thing for many organizations, I believe. Again, I mentioned it before, the collaborative edge is so important. But I think power differentials as well. So to address the change, it has to be embedded. One of the things that has been created in some of the work I'm doing in regards to like the built environment, but I think it's scalable and it carries over into other modes, is an inclusion management plan. Because I think a lot of the time there are organizations that have really strong people that are the glue of the organization and keep the momentum, but should they leave, then the organization almost experiences a brain drain. So an inclusion management plan helps to embed that in the blueprint to ensure that whoever comes on board, this whole thing about parity of esteem and people cherry picking, what type of disability or impairment or need and requirement they want to engage with is eradicated, put to an end, so that it's just done the right way in line with the social model of disability. That makes sense. That's a really long answer, sorry.
I'm really struck by how much there's sort of two things really coming through for me very strongly. One is to hear all of you speaking very eloquently about your experience, but also how much useful information there is in terms of resources, ways of looking at things and giving people different ways of different perspectives, but also kind of lots of research and theory that helps to support. This is all about building knowledge, isn't it? And understanding. And also you did note about paying people for their time, which was there was a whole question earlier on about consultancy and an expectation that people who belong to networks are expected by some to give their time for free, and how that just is not appropriate. So we had a conversation about that too. Thank you. Thanks, Natasha. I'm just going to ask Zoe to very briefly speak about, so this is we're hearing about how people are working within organizations and challenging and making change. And I just wanted to flag, Zoe, that as part of the resources that have been created, you have written in the best practice guide, which we've put the links into, you've written some guidance on sort of 4 steps really about how people can go about embedding digital strategy into long-term planning. Would you just say something about the steps that you've come up with, why those are the important ones? Just can you speak about it briefly, and then it'll just, people can then go off and read it in their own time, or listen to it in their own time.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think in the conversation with Harmeet and Fiona and everybody at the very beginning of this process, there's a lot of information already out there. There's masses of it, but it's knowing which bit of information to find and how quickly you can find it and how useful it is, and so you can little tiny things can be you can Google things and find out very quickly how you might want to embed audio description into your organizational frameworks. But I think deeper than that, I think you need to have more awareness and more insight into using smart objectives and things, and thinking about what are the gaps within our organization and how do we begin to plan. And Tony's talked about it, and Natasha has talked about it. What are these frameworks that we have in place? So it's not just one accessibility expert within our organization pushing for this change, because one of the things is when that happens and when they leave, you get organizational amnesia and everything disappears. So it's how do we embed it across the entire organization, and what are the steps for us to do that? And you've got to put goals and milestones in to do that. I think one of those terms that Tony talked about is about being transparent and honest. I think that is really useful to do that. So I think it's, you've got to have this bigger picture in your head about where you're going with it and what you want to achieve by the end of it. But the timescales are important as well. And we know, it's different capacities for different organisations. That works in different way. And I think somebody popped it in, but I'd read quite recently with a lot of other work that I was doing, Ashley Shue's the new book Against Techno-Ableism. Maybe start there, maybe start thinking about, or look, someone's already looked at this stuff. Whatever we say, someone's already had a look at it. So borrow that information, go and access it, and that will help you. And what we didn't want to do is to produce a set of guidance notes, because, and it's the same in architecture and design, it's the same in, dance. You've got to be doing it. You can read a set of rules and a set of guidance notes. It's a bit like the Disability Discrimination Act. It's a bit about the Equalities Act. But what you've actually got to do is just be with disabled people and learn and make changes happen and understand what that means for your organisation and yourself, really, about the new ways you might do something.
Thank you very much. What we're going to do now, go on. Natasha, did you want to add something, Natasha, and then I'll just finish up my point? Go on.
I was just I agree with what Zoe said, and I just wanted to build on that and say, I tend to describe it as lots of different ingredients, all the information. So like there's no set outcome, but you have all these great ingredients and then you combine them like a recipe, and then the outcome is something that's inclusive. But just so people know that you're not going to give them all the answers, all the information's there, and then you decide what you want to do with those ingredients, to create inclusive change.
Thank you very much.
A recipe for change, Natasha, I think.
Absolutely. Thank you. So what we're going to do now is we have a webinar evaluation form, which we put the link into chat for those of you who can reach it, and it's just really helpful to us to understand how this has been for all of you, and whether there's things that we could change and do differently. So we'll give it a couple of minutes. I think there's 5 questions. So for those of you who are willing and able to fill in the evaluation, we would really appreciate that. Then I will come back to the panel, and so I'll ask them while you're doing that just to have a think about is there one other piece of advice or recommendation that they would like to share with the audience. And I'll ask Harmeet to say something about what the next steps on this will be for the space. So we'll come back in 2 minutes and just finish off with a final thought from each of the panelists. Okay, I'll ask the panel to come back. And then we'll just have a moment with everybody. And there was one question that we had, Harmeet, I think, has answered, talking about Eleanor's question about problems with audio description, why it's such a challenge. So I'm just throwing that out there. So the question was asked a bit earlier on, 12:11, if anybody wants to have a look at that. If anybody's got any other thoughts about what the challenges were or challenges are of using audio description, perhaps you could answer those to Eleanor. That would be really useful. So a final thought from Natasha. Was there any last thing that you would want to say to our audience? Anything that you haven't had a chance, that if it feels important, you haven't had a chance to say yet? And perhaps
we're stronger together. So I'm an advocate for transdisciplinary methods and approaches, joined up approach. Let's pool our resources, skills and passions, and try and embed the change that we need.
Thank you very much. Tony, what do you have a final thought, something that you haven't had a chance to say yet?
I feel like I made the point, but just crack on. I think it can feel also big and scary sometimes, and people worry so much about the getting it wrong element. And I believe that if you do things in good faith, that people will give you the grace for it. And actually, for that reason, just do the small thing that you can, as Zoe was saying, kind of all those small little things make a big difference. But then don't lose sight of the big changes either. It's not licensed to sit back and tick the box.
Thank you very much. And Zoe, are you going to, do you have a final thought or anything that you haven't had a chance to say yet?
I think, and it's been mentioned, but just to mention it again, it can be fun, it can be really exciting to think differently, to work with different people, to have a different perspective, to unravel the way that we do things and decide why the establishment hasn't broken those traditions. I mean, that's what we're about, isn't it? Working in the cultural sector, it's about the opportunity to break the frameworks that exist and just enjoy it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Harmeet, is there anything that you can say about what happens next, what the next steps for this might, from the spaces perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think we've literally scratched the tip of the iceberg, as it were. In the first phase of the access working group and the first set of resources that we've developed so far, and hearing the panel today who we all worked with, it's so brilliant to hear everyone's insights and conversations and points of view and perspectives, because actually, like it's been echoed, the point is to start somewhere, and it's okay to go, we've got things that were successful and things that failed, and we can iterate and learn from those and keep building, keep moving forward. I think that's a really liberating approach to have, and you see that in the tech sector quite a lot. So I think it's about embracing those things. In terms of the next steps for the space, we're going to continue to work with the cohort. So somebody mentioned in the chat about, where do you find your networks? We've got our contributors list of all of our professionals and our cohort who worked with us. That's a great first starting point if you're looking to find the networks that maybe, you haven't been aware of before. But also, it's about us continuing to look at what digital accessibility means, looking at what that means for the industry and those standards. And it's also about us recognizing that this is a long game. It's not something that we're going to solve and then sit back and go, we've done this in the space of 6 months or 3 months. Actually, it's about going, how are we making sure that those who are underrepresented are now in the mainstream? How is the industry taking advantage of the insight and the information that's available and moving forward? We see that happening in the commercial sector quite a lot. It's the kind of the space where innovation occurs, and you can read about that in the thought leadership piece. And so it's bringing all these elements together and saying, actually, as a funder, we are here and ready to support organizations who want to do this, whether that's on a really small scale startup point on one project, or whether it's embedding it long term. And you can come to us for that support. But also, we want to continue to engage again, to build a network, to carry on working with the cohort, and to keep moving forward, so that actually we can create work that is accessible for audiences, that has value, and that actually represents a global majority, and also represents the needs of many, many people.
Lovely, thank you. On which note, it's 12:30, so I want to say that brings us to the end of our webinar today, and I wanted to thank you all, to all the panel, for sharing so generously your insights and your experience and your recommendations, and the quality of conversation in general has been brilliant. And thank you, audience, for joining in, asking questions and engaging with it all. And that's that, and away and enjoy the rest of your day, but huge appreciation to you all for your time. Thank you.